Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to our friends who are joining us from Europe and other time zones. Welcome to our webinar today on the topic of responsible AI in times of pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the development and adoption of digital solutions, especially in public health. And along with that, there are more and more considerations about the ethical and responsible use of technology. And therefore, SGInnovate and the Embassy of Sweden in Singapore are happy to co-present to you the conversation on this topic today. My name is Tuan from SGInnovate, and I would now like to invite Dr. Lim Jue, CEO at SGInnovate, to get us started with his opening remarks. Dr. Lim, please.
Okay, thanks Tuan, and once again, a very good afternoon or morning to everyone. Welcome to this webinar on responsible AI in times of pandemic, jointly brought to you by the Embassy of Sweden to Singapore and SGInnovate. We are particularly grateful to Ambassador Farnström for taking time off his very busy schedule to grace this event. Although having said that, it is no surprise at all because Ambassador Farnström and his team at the Swedish Embassy are tireless evangelists of the innovation agenda in the bilateral relations between Sweden and Singapore. And I've had the pleasure, both in my previous role at the Nanyang Technological University and in my new one at SGInnovate, to work with this team. I understand from my colleagues, my new colleagues at SGInnovate, that we have a long-standing relationship, and I look forward to more of the same with the Swedish Embassy. The presence today suggests that this topic is something that you've thought about and you care about. And for those for whom this is not true, it probably should be. My own feelings on AI can be summed up in a few words. I hate it, that I love it, right? I'm thrilled when I'm online shopping that unsolicited, unrelated purchasing suggestions are made that actually resonate with me. But at the very same time, I'm aghast at the sheer audacity of the very suggestion. And then, of course, a few weeks later, the credit card bill shows up and you look at how much you've spent and you ask yourself, you know, did I really need that? What a sucker, right? So, and that's in the relatively harmless space of online shopping. The stakes are significantly higher in the current pandemic, and the ambivalence towards the use of AI in response to this pandemic is justifiably heightened. And that's obviously because the impact of AI in both positive and negative ways is so much greater, and sometimes in potentially irreversible and asymmetric ways. So side by side with better containment of the pandemic also arises risks and fears about job displacement, about bias, about the loss of privacy, to name just a few of the potential negative outcomes. And this is not helped by the absence of a final, overarching, universally accepted and binding ethical framework that governs the use of AI, if that is even possible. So we have with us today two experts to talk us through some of these issues. Professor Virginia Dignum from Umeå University, as well as Sunita Kannan from Microsoft. But before I hand you over to them, it gives me great pleasure to invite Ambassador Farnström to say a few words. Ambassador?
Thank you very much. First, let me say how pleased I am to be associated with this event and to once again work with SGInnovate. SGInnovate is a long-term partner of the Swedish Embassy here in Singapore, and apart from being, and since many years, and apart from being part of the Deep Tech Summit, I think as a partner, I think we've worked on pretty much every aspect of technology. We've done events on fintech, on green tech, on women in tech, even space technology. And so we look forward to exploring new frontiers. So it's very, very nice to work with you again. Secondly, I want to say in front of everyone a formal congratulations and welcome to Dr. Lim Jue, who we know, of course, we've worked together with Intuitive, and we know you'll be an excellent CEO to work with. We're very excited as we are starting to eventually, hopefully, come out of COVID-19 and the crisis. I think, taking a step back, the most important thing that we can do, I think that we, Sweden and Singapore, as innovation nations, I always say that we usually end up in the top 5 of any given innovation ranking. These rankings don't mean so much, but we are countries that are laser focused on finding the latest technology. And I think the most important thing that we can do over the coming years coming out of this crisis is to restart smart. In other words, not just try to pick up where we left off, but taking one step ahead, looking what is a sustainable way to pick up, what is a technologically innovative way to pick up, and of course, not least, using the technology that we've studied to come out of the crisis itself. And I listened when I listened to Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat here in Singapore deliver his speech on the latest budget crisis budget package. It was striking how many times he was discussing digitalization, innovation, and actually quite a few times artificial intelligence specifically. I think he was talking about it in the context of training, in the context of healthcare. And I must say that one very clear conclusion already from the COVID crisis is the incredibly important role that AI will play in healthcare. That's clear already. In terms of Swedish cooperation, we pride ourselves in having not just being innovative, but having 2 other very important pieces of the puzzle. And I would say the first one is that we're one of the most multinational per capita heavy countries in the world. We're proud to have a whole bunch of multinational corporations that will drive this type of innovation, from AstraZeneca, Ericsson, Volvo, Scania, ABB. In fact, AstraZeneca, I think Minister Chandran Singh witnessed the signing of some MOUs with AstraZeneca on the topic, and Singapore on the topic of artificial intelligence in healthcare. So that's clearly something that we can keep working on. We also have the Nordic Innovation House here in Singapore, which is an initiative that we do with Nordic colleagues to get startups involved, to dare to focus on this region, and I think we can build bridges there. Then secondly, of course, we have in Sweden one part of our ecosystem that's quite special, is the role that research and our academic institutions play. And because Sweden, I think as Swedes, we always look for the ethical aspect of things. And I know that that's been done here in Singapore. I was very impressed when NTU set up the NIST, the institute, looking at humanities and technology. And I've been waiting to have an opportunity to have Professor Virginia Dignum either come to Singapore, as was our original idea, or at least talk to Singapore partners on these topics, because they are truly important for the future, the human aspects, the ethical aspects of AI, and particularly, not least in healthcare, of course, with data. I'm also pleased that Virginia, that you're involved in the Wallenberg program for artificial intelligence, software and automation. In a previous role, I used to work for the Wallenberg family. I think it's great what the foundations are doing on this front. So that's another example of where research, corporations, and government can collaborate. So with that, this is a very important topic, and I look forward to exploring that further with Singaporean partners. But above all, because as a diplomat, I'm not really an expert on anything, really look forward to these impressive presentations to come. Thanks. I heard that there's like 150 people on this call, so thank everyone for dialing in. And again, pleasure to work with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador von Strom. And I just have to echo what you said about our strong ties and collaborations between SGInnovate and Sweden so far. And the one common theme across all the activities we have done together is how we could utilize science and technology for the good of humanity and society. And that is why we are also doing this particular presentation together. Continuing with our program, we would first have 2 presentations by Virginia and Sunita followed by a panel discussion as we deep dive into the topic of responsible AI in times of pandemic. We will welcome any questions that you may have for any of our speakers, and so please feel free to post them through the Q&A box that you can see on your screen, and you can also upvote questions that you would like to have answered, and we will be able to respond to the questions during the panel discussion time. I would now like to introduce our first speaker of today, Professor Virginia Dignum, who Ambassador Funstrom has said is a close friend of Singapore already. I believe Virginia last visited Singapore just back in February, giving a speech on ethical AI at the Nanyang Technological University. So by way of introduction, Virginia is Professor of Social and Ethical Artificial Intelligence at Umeå University in Sweden. She is also a member of the European Commission High-Level Expert Group on AI, where she helps create guidelines and policy on the European Union AI strategy. Virginia has been a globally respected and well-known AI thought leader. She has been a member of the World Economic Forum's Global AI Council, and I believe just a couple of days ago, Virginia is also recognized to be among the world's top 50 AI ethics influencers to follow in 2020. So we are privileged to have Virginia here today with us. With that, I would like to invite Virginia to share with us her thoughts on responsible AI in times of pandemic. Virginia, please.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind words. Indeed, one of my last trips before the whole crisis started was to Singapore. I look forward to come back to Singapore when traveling is possible and desirable again. But indeed, I do believe that there is a lot of collaborations and common interests and common important issues to discuss across Sweden and Singapore, not the least on the area of the impact, humanities and social impact of artificial intelligence. I'm now going to share my screen, and it's always hoping that it works. Yes. I hope you see my screen now. Sorry, this is not the one I want to share. Yes. Okay, now we should be having my screen. Indeed, speaking about AI in times of pandemic, or speaking about AI at any time, it's important to realize the what is responsibility and what is our responsibility in AI, in developing, in using, and in accepting and interacting with AI systems. I think the most important question in this issue is the question of what should AI be doing. Indeed, we can do a lot with artificial intelligence. There are many, many, many possible applications and sectors and areas in which AI can help. AI can support human users to get to better decisions, to improve their work conditions, to improve healthcare, to improve decision-making and so on. But what should AI be doing? That is not a question that the technology itself can answer. It's a question that we as people, as users, as developers, as policymakers really need to be discussing. And who is we? That is also a very important question. It's not a discussion which can be left only for the technologists. It's also not a discussion that can be left only for the policymakers. It's a discussion that we need to take together. And therefore, the need for a much broader understanding and a much broader embracing of AI research and the use and understanding of AI across disciplines is extremely important. Because we have to be able to understand which values are to be considered and those values are to be considered. How are we going to deal with the dilemmas? And we see that now very clearly in the times of the COVID-19 crisis. Is it more important healthcare of the whole population, or shall we take into account the privacy of individuals? do we have to deal with security or with the individual right to human rights and moral principles? In a sense, it's not a question of one or the other. We really need to be able to take a discussion in which there is not a choice anymore to be made. We really have to take into account security and privacy at the same time. And how can we do that? And how we prioritize the different values. Those are the discussions that have to be done outside of the discussion about what is the best type of technology to use. So if we go just a little bit back, and where is my, what is AI? Yes, AI is about algorithms, but we use algorithms for all kinds of things. Before and after we have AI, we will be using algorithms. Every time you bake an apple pie, you are using an algorithm, the recipe to follow your apple pie, to cook your apple pie. And we all know that it's not only the recipe which is responsible for leading to the quality of the apple pie that you bake. A lot more is there. The choice that you make in terms of the ingredients that you use, the choice that you make in terms of the group, the team, the cooks that are going to do it, are all as important or more important than the algorithm that you follow to make your apple pie. Artificial intelligence is not just about machine learning, and it's not just about data. It's a combination of all these issues, and is mostly, I would say, an issue of the social technical context in which the system is being used. Yes, systems are autonomous. Yes, the technology is adaptable. Yes, we interact with this technology, but is the conditions under which we can interact with this technology, the regulations, the guidelines, the ways that we have to interact, to decide when to use, when not to use, how to use, who to involve, those are, in my opinion, even more important issues to discuss than whether we are going to use a convolutional neural network or a reinforcement learning algorithm. And that brings us to the idea of responsible AI, which is about ensuring that systems and applications and service and products developed with artificial intelligence are, first of all, lawful, and that holds for any technology that we are using, but also that they are ethical, so they are aligned with the ethics and the principles and the values of the communities and the populations they are relating to. It's also about building systems that are reliable and robust, that they don't crash on us, that they don't start acting crazy under unexpected situations. It's about systems that are beneficial, and all of this needs to be verifiable. It's very easy to demand that we want systems to be fair or to ensure privacy. It's a completely different thing to decide how can we verify that a piece of software is indeed fair or is inclusive or so on. It's also, responsible AI is also about recognizing that AI is not magic. AI is an artifact, is a technology developed by people, for people and with people, and we are the ones who set the purpose for this technology. It's not something who happens to us, we make it happen, we people, we communities, we, all of us, and therefore we are responsible for the purpose that we set. So if we go back to the COVID-19 crisis and what can AI be doing now, indeed there are many, and I just list here very few of the issues in which AI is at this very moment being used in the handling and tackling the crisis, on the prediction of spread and contagion, on development of vaccines and medicines, on the issues of policy designing and evaluation, but also on issues of tracking and tracing of populations. All of these are potentially extremely beneficial and extremely efficient and possible applications and services, but we really need to take into account the requirements for responsibility in AI. And now more than ever, because maybe now more than ever, AI is going to impact our lives directly without our direct control. So we need to take into account AI, that is the requirements of robustness, of transparency, ensuring that what is being done is clear and explainable to those we are using or making decisions based on that. It's also ensuring the respect for human rights, for the ethical principles and existing regulation. And of course, is also ensuring that the systems that are being developed are inclusive of all and are aligned with principles of fairness. Just to finish my presentation, I will give you 2 examples of work done at my department here in Umeå at the moment, in collaboration with other colleagues across Sweden and across Europe. One is a recent paper that we just published 2 weeks ago, in which we have provided an assessment list, a very simple guidelines to analyze and evaluate the many different tracking apps that are being used in the world. I just give here a small example of one which I believe is being used in Singapore itself. We list them in the paper, we describe much more what are this type of requirements which we should consider. And of course, we don't have to deal or to handle all of them, but at least during the development and during the decisions about using or not this type of systems, we have to think about all these type of aspects, and in terms of how it impacts citizens, what type of technology is used, and how are these systems being governed. And in the analysis that we did of several of these type of technologies, we can see that a lot of these issues have not really been thought of. So we are developing technology without really taking into account potential impacts and also the effect of it in the future. And finally, another of the work that we've been doing is a very large social simulation system, agent-based, in which we provide a tool for mostly for policymakers to be able to understand and to analyze and to test their potential ideas in terms of regulations, in terms of interventions to deal with the spread of the crisis, but also with the impact of the crisis on society and on economics. And it's work that has been doing with a group of people across Europe. It's all open source, so I have the website there. You can, if you are interested, you can use it and download and try your own case there. Just as an example of things that we have been doing. So I end here my presentation, and I look forward to Sunita's presentation now.
Thank you very much, Virginia. I particularly like the assessment framework that you just shared that takes into account all the various contact tracing apps. I think on that note, 2 weeks ago, there was a study of all the contact tracing apps in Southeast Asia, and Singapore's Trace Together is found to possibly top the privacy element of that study. So they found that Trace Together in general complies with Singapore's Personal Data Protection Act, as well as Europe's general data protection regulation as well. So we will visit this topic a little bit more during our panel discussion.
And definitely and the point is that it's not just about checking whether these tracing apps deal with privacy or not. That's one of the many issues, and we really have to take into consideration many other issues, like we described that in the paper. But indeed, the privacy, it was one of the issues in which the Singapore app scored quite positively indeed. Yes.
For sure. And I'm sure that is something that Sunita, our next speaker, will be touching on a little bit as well. So I would now like to introduce Sunita Kannan. She is currently the Data and AI Solutions Lead in APJ at Microsoft. Sunita has been a dear friend of SGInnovate, having spoken on various topics with us so far. She is well experienced managing many advanced analytics and AI projects for some of the world's largest corporations across various industries. Before joining Microsoft, we have been knowing Sunita since she was with consulting firm Accenture as their AI advisory and responsible AI lead in Asia Pacific. So we are very happy to have Sunita here share with us her business perspectives on responsible AI. Could I invite you, Sunita, to get us started, please?
Hi, Tuan. Thank you so much. Thanks, Professor. That was a good segue into some of the topics that I'll be briefly touching on as well. So, hi, everyone. As Tuan mentioned, I come in from more of a consultative background. So we'll bring in business perspective. So I'm technologically challenged here, so let me try this. Does that work? Fine. Okay, cool. So I will not drain this, but I think we all know what AI is. I think it's been defined multiple times, and even just now. Well, I think the purpose of the slide, it was very interesting that, you know, when people started to actually, when it first started out, one of the main questions that Alan Turing asked in the 1950s, explicitly here, was, can machines think? And I think that's how it sort of got into everyone's minds on how do we put whatever, you know, humans are learning into machines, and that's how artificial intelligence pretty much, you know, grew. So key points here to keep in mind are it's the ability for technology to be able to perceive, learn, and adapt and extend capabilities in people and organizations, right? So those are some of the main things I think we have to take away from here. It's any tasks that, you know, the machine can start to learn over time. So that's the concept of machine learning, at least. Which is one of the areas of AI. And AI and I know this question comes up quite a bit, but AI is like a family of different kinds of things. One of them is machine learning. One of them is neural networks and so on. So moving from here, I just want to talk about some of the use cases of AI, especially right now. I think it was mentioned earlier on, you know, going into a shop and being, you know, recommended some of the things that you could purchase based on your previous historic patterns. That's one of the things, right? And so just to go into some of these to some extent, personalization is a big topic these days, and how you're actually going to be able to predict for a particular customer or for a particular segment of customers, what are people looking for from a shop that they walk into based on their historic needs or their historic trends, right? So using historic data to be able to predict what the future looks like for those, or recommendations based on that data. There was also a recent article which was really interesting, which is that the COVID-19 demands are sort of messing with all the AI systems out there for some of the retailers. So toilet rolls, which were never in high demand, which have suddenly just peaked over COVID-19, have sort of messed with the algorithm. So people are not being recommended what they usually would have purchased otherwise. So it was an interesting article. I mean, the other area which is taking a pretty big hit as a female myself, I'm sure, is the cosmetic section, right? So what is happening in that space now that everyone is working from home, and how are they, you know, dealing with retail stores being closed? What are they looking for? If it's online, what have the options opened up for them, right? So all these things are pretty interesting during this pandemic. Automation, for sure. I think there are a lot of people who are underestimating the power of AI and what it can do to be able to automate a lot of you know, repetitive kind of tasks which people would otherwise have to spend a lot of time doing, and how can AI be utilized for that? Learning, training, collaboration. Needless to say, we are using Zoom right now, and Zoom right now has a virtual background behind me. It's able to distinguish the background versus me. That in itself is a form of AI. So is the fact that, you know, there are new tools coming up in these collaboration platforms. I have to talk about Teams, sorry, Tom. That is going to enable, you know, being able to remove the background noise. Now, how is it able to distinguish my voice versus the background noise? It's also a function of artificial intelligence. So that, I mean, things people don't even think about happening in everyday lives. It's quite important to point that out. Demand forecasting is a big topic, especially right now during the pandemic. It's very important to understand how are supply and demand going to be balanced for maybe, you know, the first phase of post-pandemic not post-pandemic, post-circuit breaker, the next phase, and so on. So how do you actually ramp that up based on trends that they're looking at, based on data points that they're looking at? Early detection. So the next few are actually from a recent Gartner article, which came out, which talks about explicitly in the subject of healthcare services, some of the areas that we want to look at, for instance, early detection and epidemic analysis. What does that look like to actually predict how and where the virus is spreading and slowing down, for instance? Containment, for instance, looks at one-size-fits-all measures such as lockdowns, collaboration efforts with non-IT experts, how to actually apply AI to containment efforts. Triage and diagnosis, and then healthcare operations. I'm actually kind of attached this one particular topic, healthcare operations, as well, because it can be applied a lot to the elderly right now. So I was just giving a talk on the aging population, Tuan, you were there as well. And I think this is very relevant for that. And incidentally, that happened to be just as COVID-19 was creeping up on us. This is a very, very, very good place to use actually AI. It's a good use case for AI. If you're using chatbots for the elderly to be able to support them during this time so that they don't have to go in and to a clinic each time or go into a hospital and increase their exposure. So what can AI do with respect to that? So it again uses data. And of course, vaccine research and development and how we're going to use historic data. And I think this was also actually mentioned in Professor Virginia's paper, that, what is the kind of data that we're looking at? Do we have enough historic data of this type to be able to come up with a solution to the problem in the first place? We can explore that later in the conversations for sure. But that's, I think, a very interesting point, because AI needs quite a bit of historic data to be able to learn from past events to be able to apply to future events. So do we have enough of COVID-19 related data or not? Because it's a very new and hopefully soon to be ending pandemic. So how can we trust the predictions from that, right? So that's a important thing. Now, the reason why I had to put up use cases for AI is because responsible AI is not separate from AI, right? What I did want to highlight is that responsible AI basically is the ability to actually touch on these few things. So just before I go into that in more detail, some of the apps, the tracing apps, which are being used around the world, and this was touched on earlier by Professor Virginia as well. So some of the things that have been highlighted from these tracing apps are, some of them are actually mandating the use of these apps for the people in the country, and some of them are not. And it's the ability to be able to choose your rights. And recently there was another article which actually highlighted a lot of other things that came out from these apps, for example, partners cheating on one another, and so on. So this again goes back to the point of, do people have the free will to choose whether they want to opt in to use these apps or not? I think Singapore gave that freedom to the people, right? So they did mention the benefits of using the app is for the sake of health and safety, but they left it to the people to go ahead with getting it installed and using it and stuff. So how does that data privacy actually get you tick a little box? Do you know what you're ticking before you tick it? I think that's a very important piece that you want to keep in mind. And the very interesting thing is that people are opening up a lot more these days because they're more aware of these kinds of situations. So they're being a lot more conscious when they choose a particular app or an AI system to be working in the background. Now, just quickly, it's a very long piece of text, this is from Dr. Salima in Microsoft. And one of the things I did want to point out is the responsible AI is all about the how, right? So how do we design and deploy these systems, which are fair, reliable, safe, and trustworthy? So those are the key takeaways. And some of the things that we need to think about are obviously the set of socio-technical problems. We need to go beyond just improving the data and the models. We also need to think about the people who are using these systems, and that's very, very key. Who are the people who are using these systems? Are they data scientists? Are they the business? And then are you being able to provide that fair, reliable, safe, and trustworthy kind of solution back to them? And with that, well, I'll end it with this, Tuan, and I'm sure we'll have questions later on these topics. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sunita. In fact, I think both your and Virginia's presentations have set a really good foundation for our conversation that will follow. And we have started receiving questions from the audience. And I think the first couple of questions are also great for us to start with. So Virginia and Sunita, both of you actually dive a little bit into contact tracing apps in your presentation. Are contact tracing apps your favorite example of how AI and technology, when used responsibly, could actually benefit society, especially during this time of pandemics? Or are there other examples of use cases of responsible AI during this time that you would like to highlight to the audience? May I start with you, Virginia?
Sure. Yes. Thank you for your question. Thank you for presentation, Sunita. Very interesting to see your perspective on these issues. Yes, contact tracing apps, I think they can both illustrate all what is good with AI, but also all what is bad with AI in this type of situations. It is a technology which really can bring AI development to an edge and provide benefits if applied well. But it's exactly a few things which Sunita also mentioned. Firstly is the availability of data. Do we have enough data to train and to understand how these contacts really mean in terms of infection, in terms of spreading of the disease? Do we know enough about how the disease itself spreads to be able to correlate that with the contacts that people have and extrapolate from their potential future behavior? So those are issues which really require much more research and much more experience, because there is nothing worse than using the wrong data for the wrong purpose. And if you are not really sure that the data that we have is appropriate for the purpose, then we really need to reconsider. And that's one of the first questions that we have to take when we look at responsible AI. On the other hand, contact tracing does reflect a lot of the issues, a lot of the human rights and the values that we value in society. And in that sense, makes it a very good example to see how AI and how technology is addressing these issues. And again, what I started in my presentation, how do we prioritize and balance between different issues? How are we going to balance between the individual privacy and the potential benefit for the collective of the whole country in terms of safety and health health care? So those are issues. It makes it a very good example to deal with when we are talking about responsible AI. But I think that AI can be and should be employed more than just, and then again, looking at AI broader than machine learning, looking at AI also from the perspective of the knowledge representation, the decision making, and the decision support systems. And that I think that there is a lot that AI can do to provide policymakers, to provide the public in general with a better insight and better understanding of what's happening. So these very simple simulations that I showed that we are doing enable people to understand what if situations. What if everybody uses the app? What if not everybody, only a few percentage of the people are using the app? What if we all stay at home? What if the shops are going to open? What if the schools are going to start? And that is another way to look at AI, which really can benefit the global understanding and in the end also the global trust and well-being, because we will be better informed and better understanding of what's happening.
Thank you very much, Virginia. We will be revisiting your point about wrong data for wrong purpose in just a bit. But I just want to also have Sunita's thoughts on her favorite examples of use cases of responsible AI during these times of pandemic.
So, Tuan, it's a very interesting discussion only because when people think about responsible AI in the pandemic, usually people go into the healthcare scenarios, right? So anything to do with COVID-19 explicitly, and that's what they usually think about. But I mean, that apart, I don't want to deprioritize that for sure. But there's also a lot of businesses which are struggling right now because they just don't know how to use AI remotely during this pandemic. So I think we need to be able to think about, you know, the retailer business, think about the manufacturing business out there, think about the financial services. How can they use, you know, AI in I don't know, the work that they do day in and day out? So whether it's insurance companies, I mean, that's a very interesting time right now for them. And then we have banks and like, you know, other financial services companies. We have, you know, ones which are recruitment companies, right? So one of the questions that got asked to me in another place was actually, how do we trust that, you know, people whom we are recruiting or interviewing online are actually giving an honest smile? Can AI actually detect a fake smile versus? And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, you can, and it's true, right? And that's where AI will come in and actually be able to help. And no, it's not going to do every single task of yours, and that's not the purpose of AI. But can you get a lot of the grunt work done by AI before you actually go into a human interaction model? So I'm thinking maybe the first, I don't know, if you're 4 interviews for a particular job, maybe the first 2 or 3 interviews to be run by, you know, AI, whether it's scanning the CVs and making sense of, you know, this person is a very positive person based on, you know, NLP and text analytics and sentiment analysis that we have done on their CVs. And let's move them to the next round. And then, you know, you have tools, some which are able to detect a real smile versus a fake smile, and not how, but yeah. And then which then actually take you to an actual human doing the final interview. So it's not like, you know, you're going to replace the entire end-to-end by a bot, by an AI bot. So there's that. There's also a lot of those use cases that I spoke about. Actually, a lot of the retail firms, because they had to close down, I'm thinking Singapore here, for example, are going to, it's going to be a very interesting time for them when they open up, right? Because they need to see if the demand is still the same or has the demand shifted. So a lot of maybe analyzing the data from the online shopping. If I just think about an example, Sephora, right? So their retail stores are closed. So, but people are still buying their products and they can still buy them online. So the ability to be able to use that data to then say where the demand might be in the future. So predictive model using that. So you don't have to go all out into, you know, computer vision or any of those sort of things. It can also be as simple as, you know, predictive using analytics, basic analytics that you can make use of. So there's a lot of things apart from the COVID-19 specific kind of situations where you can use AI. And obviously I keep referring to AI because to me it's irresponsible. AI is not really the way to go, right? You want to implement AI, you want to do it responsibly. And it's not at all a scary concept because it's a matter of being able to ensure a few things. If I think about the way the pillars that, for example, Microsoft has put together, it's fairness, inclusiveness, you know, the avoidance of bias, as well as, you know, things like security, privacy, safety, reliability, and all of it built on accountability and transparency. So those are the 6 main pillars that, you know, we focus on. And accountability is key. I think transparency was covered by a professor earlier, and I couldn't agree more. And I am a huge fan of, you know, stressing the importance of accountability. Who's actually going to take accountability for what's happening in the AI models? And how is it going to make the decisions? Who's ultimately responsible and accountable for that? Sorry, Tuan, go ahead.
Well, thank you very
Very
much,
passionate
Sunita.
topic.
I really like that we actually are expanding the talk to beyond just health, because among the audience, we have a quite diverse profile of industries represented with sectors. We have a very, very good list of questions that are very in line with our conversation. So we've got about another half an hour to go for our panel discussion. So I want to go with a rapid question answer format with you both. Let's start with this particular question. We all recognize the importance of responsible AI. The real question is how to actually apply responsible AI in practice, how to make sense of concepts such as accountability, transparency, and so on. There have been some efforts to actually develop metrics for businesses to measure how they are fairly using AI in their processes, such as one by the Monetary Authority of Singapore in partnership with SGInnovate and EY and the financial services industry. So we want to hear your thoughts on whether there are already metrics, measures, or guidelines out there for governments, businesses to apply AI responsibly. What are your thoughts? Perhaps Virginia, I could start with you.
Sure. That's a very good question, and it's indeed the basis for the whole discussion. I think it's great to, and actually responsible AI, it's pretty logic. It's like Sunita says, it's not scary at all. It's not something which we are adding to current technology, but it's really the issue of starting any discussion or any thoughts about applying AI technology, not from the technology perspective, but from the potential impact and the effect of the technology. It's not about let's rush after the next best type of technology that other ones are using because seemingly others are using it, but starting with the question, what do we need? What is our responsibility and the potential impact of what we are doing in our clients, in our people, our own people, in the environment, in the country, in society in general, and how can we best address that? It's a question which cannot be answered only by technology, and definitely not only by technologists. It requires, and it's one of the other questions in the Q&A about who owns AI in organizations. It's indeed a question of realizing that you cannot answer this by asking the developers of the AI systems or the ones who are deciding on the procurement or implementation of AI systems to answer these questions. It's a question who really needs to start at the top level and the top management of the company, involve all types of disciplines, involve legal people, involve sociologists, involve the technology, of course, involve our clients, involve our staff, and really getting a discussion going, because that's the first basis for responsibility, is that we provide the transparency and the possibility for all to participate in the decisions and in the discussion. And that requires at the basis education and enable everybody to be able to participate and to have an informed opinion on what you are discussing.
Thank you, Virginia. And Sunita, from your response on this question of how to apply responsible AI in practice, I think it would be good if you can also address Jason's question on who might own responsible AI governance in organizations, and what it is that, from your experience at Microsoft, what it is that Microsoft is doing in particular on the domain of responsible AI during this COVID-19 pandemic.
Sure. So I wish I had the answer to Jason's question, but let me give it a stab. So I think that, look, one of the surveys previously done was asking organizations across the board on do they think they have a responsible AI board set up in the organization, and most people said, yeah, we do, and we're all covered, yes. But if you actually go into the organization and look, what is being implemented, and I think this covers the point of, for leaner firms, we're not expecting a completely different, set of bodies to own this. It's existing set of bodies coming together and making sure that, there is a council for responsible AI, only to make sure that any AI implementations cover the basic grounds of responsible use of these AI implementations. So if I give an example, if you have an organization of, 20 people, 2 from each of the different departments, 2 from legal, 2 from, data science, it's about bring one over and then bring a business stakeholder over, actually form a small council to actually understand how is the AI being implemented for the sake of that business to be resolved using AI, and have all the boxes been considered? Has security been considered? Has privacy been considered? Are we making sure that there is an accountable person, or a set of people who are taking responsibility and accountability? Has a RACI been set up to ensure that any AI implementation that is done is covered in terms of a human to take responsibility or accountability for that, what's coming out of that, as well as whom is it for? Who are your consumers? Are they expecting a completely transparent system where everything is shared with them in terms of the data that was used and how it's going to be used and everything? In which case you need to ensure that is communicated well between your consumers and yourself, because you're doing this basically for them. So all these things need to come together. It's not a separate, you're not asked to hire 20 other people in your organization for this purpose. That's why I keep mixing responsible AI with AI, because I don't want to keep them separate. You want to make sure that every AI implementation or analytics implementation has a factor of responsibility in it, and that it comes from your existing people who know your businesses really well, who know their departments and what's for example, the legal or the compliance regulations within your company, who would know that better than your legal team. So get a person from your legal team involved in that AI council to be able to run that, governance forum. And no, it's not the same as data governance. I want to keep that very clear, because people go, we have a data governance forum council. Well, that ticks the box. It's like, no, that ticks some boxes, but then AI, irresponsible AI is it's a lot bigger than that. I mean, you want to make sure of data governance for sure, but you also want to make sure that from an AI perspective, that black box is not black box anymore. There is a set of things around it that are governed, that are set up for success for your organization and for your consumers. So that's your first question, Tuan. The second question that Microsoft is doing in this space is actually, I'm very excited to share this because it's actually quite new news, apart from the fact that, the model of responsible AI, as I said, is built on the 6 pillars of that I mentioned earlier. If I just go back to my notes, it's fairness, privacy and security, safety and reliability and inclusiveness, to make sure that even for people who are facing any challenges or disabilities, you're not excluding those individuals, right? So you want to make sure that AI practices are inclusive. And they're all built on 2 of the basic pillars. One is accountability. Again, that gets covered by the RACI that your AI council, responsible AI council, would build, and transparency based on the consumers that you're targeting these outcomes for. Some of the things which have been recently shared, there was a Microsoft Build event that actually happened recently, I think last week, all the days have sort of merged working from home. So I think it was last week, and there were new toolkits that were actually shared as part of the build, which actually gives the developers a lot of power to really understand their models, and can actually see, so that they can see the interpretability within them and the fairness within them, and begin to understand other parameters. So one of them is actually called white noise, which is a toolkit for differential privacy. There is another called Fair Learn, which looks at AI systems fairness and mitigations of any observed unfair issues. And Interpret ML, which actually incorporates a lot of machine learning interpretability techniques, which is actually elucidated through the visualization tools of Microsoft as well. So it's actually, it's putting it all together and coming all together, because a lot of ML is no longer going to be in the black box because of these toolkits now. I'm very happy to share these because actually they're quite recent and they've just been implemented now into the Azure ML. So it's time for responsible AI in everything that we're doing. Yes. Thanks, John.
So I think a lot of members of the audience have been asking for both of your contacts so that they could reach out to you to further discuss some of the conversations, topics we are having here. But from our experience working with corporates and startups in AI solutions and the ethics question, I do share your thoughts that it is not a question of technology. So as Virginia highlighted, it is we who set the purpose for the AI systems, and so it is we who actually design and put into motion how responsible, how ethical it is that we want to do. Bringing us back to the question of some of the digital tools that have been used for this pandemic, there is a great conversation and question again from Jason on whether there is a trade-off between privacy and surveillance. So we know that a lot of there's a lot of data being collected from cameras, from our cell phones, from credit card transactions as governments want to track infections and monitor potential hotspots. It seems that when there is a public health concern, there is greater degree of tolerance for such solutions that may not fully meet privacy requirements under usual circumstances. Do you think that when there is a greater good, in this case public health, privacy and other considerations could be compromised? Or how would you think about this dichotomy?
No, I think it's exactly the issue of responsible AI is to address this dichotomy and to realize that we can, in a sense, not compromise in one type of principles for another type of principles. Also because we don't really know, okay, if things would be very black and white, which never are, and that we know that at this moment for exactly only the issue of the pandemic, we could maybe relax privacy considerations. But we already are seeing at this very moment in the United States that the tracing technology is being used, which was developed and is being developed for the pandemic, is also being used to track the demonstrators at this moment on the Black Lives Matter issue. We also don't know, at this moment in many countries of Europe, we still have regulations and things into effect, which come from the Second World War. We all at this moment still, when we fly, and now no one is flying, but when we're flying, we have regulations which we're putting into place about the liquid, taking or not liquids into the plane, which were from, I think, like 20 years ago almost, because of some addressing some terroristic issues at that moment. So the point is that it's not black and white, and it's also not something which we can kind of close around the pandemic. We really have to be aware of the potential other uses, and always technology is like any tool, can be used for many different issues, for good and for bad. If we compare AI with a hammer, we also can use the hammer to build stuff or to break stuff. We really have to take, and the discussion is not whether privacy is better than surveillance or better than healthcare, but it's the discussion that we need to have as a whole, as a society, about where do we put the boundaries. And it's also a discussion that we have to have in terms of demanding. We want and privacy and healthcare. We don't want to choose between both. We need really the technology that helps us to achieve both. And to settle for less than that, it's not the benefit of none of us. So we really need to set our standards and our requirements as high as possible. That develops not only a better result for all of us, but also will ensure that the technology and the science behind it really can be improved as well.
But Tuan, as well, you know, the fact that these questions are being asked is actually a great way that people are actually more aware of responsible AI now more than ever before. And I think that in itself is like a huge step in the right direction, because now people are questioning what is happening to their data and how are these apps going to be used. And that's where we want to get to. We want to get to the awareness state, which is a huge state amongst consumers, and to be able to ask these questions, whether it's to do with the apps, whether it's to do with any other firms out there, to know that, you know, for example, I'm getting my credit card today for an online shopping. What does this mean to me? And what does this mean to the data that's being collected on the things I'm buying? People's awareness on these topics is key right now.
Yep, I actually do agree. And once again, the matter of human intention in designing AI systems come into the question. Like, technology may neither be good nor bad. It all depends on what it is that we are setting it out to do in the first place.
And in a sense, AI is not just the technology, is the social technological context in which we are using the technology. And some of the answers should not be left to the technology, but especially is exactly for the social institutions and the social constructs around the technology. It's not for the technology to decide how we are going to use it. It's for the institutions and the groups to decide how we use technology. We cannot see AI technology as a separate thing from the context in which we are using it. And lots of the responsible AI issues lay in this context and not only in the technology.
And it's bad I'm saying this as an AI person, but I think you also need to question, why are you using AI, right? Is this the right place to use it? So starting with why, don't just go with the AI because it sounds fancy and it's the trend these days, it's a buzzword. It's not that. It's, you have a valid use case to use it, that's the why, and then the how comes into how are you planning to use it. Technology is a component of it, who's actually designing the people component, and how we're actually getting this messaging across to your consumers. That's a big part as well.
Yeah, definitely. And responsible AI is indeed about, sometimes might be to not apply AI technology in a certain issue because it's not necessary or not needed. And it's of course the other way around as well. Responsible AI is ensuring that we are using AI when AI is the best possible technology. So this is the first question we have to have, or the first answer that we need to have.
And I think building on what you both have just emphasized on the social technological lens, it brings us to the next topic of whether there could be misuse of these technologies or incidents of irresponsible AI. Right? So contact tracing, for example, started as a public health good, but now in the current situation of the racial setting in the US, it has been reported that the Minnesota police is starting to contact tracing demonstrators for criminal investigations. So this, of course, will be a example of how something that started out as good can actually later on turn into a misuse case. How can we make sure that such incidents of misuse or repurposing of AI systems would be minimized so that after this crisis is over, these are not the remnants of technology bad that we have to deal with. And this especially as some countries out there are already thinking about keeping contact tracing apps a permanent feature beyond COVID.
You're asking for a blue sky, Tuan. We're in Singapore.
I think we are getting very far from the discussion of AI or responsible AI. This is now responsible society in general. Indeed, but it's with any technology around, AI or whatever else, for the most simple or the most complex. Of course, you can use it for good or for bad. It's not the technology itself which determines the use we can have of it. It's much more, and I think then we go back to an issue of education, an issue of social responsibility and participation, which is, in a sense, very far from someone like me, which is an AI engineer. But it's issues that we really need. We can only handle those by keeping the discussion going. And like Sunita says, already now people are much more, and it's the current situation really is raising the awareness for the importance of responsibility, for the importance of participation and understanding what technology can or cannot do for us. But unfortunately, the decision for using it for good or for bad is a bit outside of the technology itself. And we can do the most we can do as public, as the society, as the citizens, is to keep the discussion going and to really demanding to the decision makers and the technologists to take their responsibility and accountability for the ways they are using the technology. That's why things like a sunset clause in this type of applications is so important, that to make really sure when are great I'm now downloading this thing because I really think I can help on the tracking the disease and the improving healthcare, but give me a very concrete sunset clause or deadline for when this thing is not used, needs to be used anymore. And not like you say, keeping it forever because it's might be useful for whatever else purpose that were not the original one.
I think you ask any technology provider out there who is looking at responsible AI in their technology landscape, what is the thing that keeps them up at night? It's going to be, what if it gets used for something bad, right? I think the ones who are thinking of it for something good are definitely going to say that, right? So one of the things that we do, so one of, like, as I said, so as Microsoft provides these toolkits, one of the other things we have is also a responsible AI committee within Microsoft itself. So what we have to ensure is that, you know, we not ensure, but what we do is, one of the things is, you know, when we talk about AI with our customers, our partners, we have to look at, you know, how to implement responsible AI. And what are the key considerations for responsible AI within the companies out there. And those things include, you know, what is it being used for, putting that responsible AI council in place, what are going to be, you know, their key roles and responsibilities to ensure that, you know, the usage is known, is monitored. It's a big word, but all those kinds of things, right? So you want to make sure that there is accountability for not only, you know, all the stuff that's happening around responsible AI or the AI implementations, but also how you're implementing it and for what purpose. So I think those will also need to be ensured.
Right, thank you both for indulging me in this wider than AI question that we just asked. Now let's get back to the AI conversation that we designed for today, right? Virginia, I really like your lens of a social technical angle of how you assess the responsible AI implementation in practice. What do you, and you also talk about the social simulation work group that help assess the effectiveness of policy responses to the pandemic by social reporting and simulation analytics and so on. From what you have seen, what would you foresee as some of the possible long-term effects on policies as well as on society and economy as we apply this social and responsible lens to the use of AI?
Oh, now you want me to have a glass box and look into the future. Like any AI, our predictions of the future are only as good as our data from the past. And when the future is very different from the past, then it's where AI starts losing its power, and we have seen that, and Sunita showed, referred to some of those examples. Yes, I think that fundamentally what potentially is going to change is the way that we are addressing the application of technology, of AI technology, but other type of technology. And I hope that that's what will be lasting from this, from what we have learned now, that it's more than just looking at technology from one single perspective. At the initial times of this crisis, and it's not very long ago, but we were all being led by the epidemics and the health the spread of the virus. So it was very much based on how can we contain the epidemics as quick and as efficiently as possible. It led, like we all know, to many issues in terms of social interaction, social welfare, well-being of all of us, and also to a huge economical crisis. So one of the issues I think that the simulations attempt to do, but also which I hope it will be a lasting lesson from this crisis, is that current situation and current life is too complex to be addressed from one single perspective only. So whenever we start addressing any issue, any problem like the epidemics now, but like things like climate change or global education or other of the sustainable development goals, we really need to take many disciplines into account. Technology and AI is one, but it's only one of them.
Thank you very much, Virginia, once again for indulging me in a larger conversation there. Now, it is very good that we have you both on the event today because Virginia, you are involved in a lot of European level AI work group discussions, and Sunita, you've been in charge of AI advisory and responsible AI for a lot of companies in Asia Pacific. Are there differences in the responsible AI thinking in different parts of the world that you may have seen, whether it's Europe versus Asia or developed versus developing countries? And should the world aim towards a shared code of responsible AI? This is also a question by one member of the audience, Kenny, who asked whether there should be regulation for this and whether it should be set by a central body or individual regulators. For your thoughts, please, Sunita and Virginia.
Oh, a loaded question. So I think pre-COVID, I think there was a lot of differences, right, between how the awareness was between, possibly Asia versus Americas versus Europe, so on. So, there was a general, feel of, and that actually spanned from, what are the different kinds of stages of AI implementations in particular that people were doing across the board in the world. Obviously, there was a lot of catch-up that Asia was doing with regard to actual AI implementations. And that doesn't mean there wasn't any. It was a different number to what we were seeing in probably America, for example, right? So where they were tried and tested, failed pretty early. So, we got to get a lot of learnings from them as well because of that. And obviously the kind of, the kind of thought process around getting that, the AI Council, Responsible AI Council body in place, getting those relevant people in place. There was a lot of emphasis on that from Europe, especially a lot of technology focus actually from Asia that you could be seeing. And just in terms of, where things are now, I think it has pretty much level set in many ways, right? Because AI implementations have people have started rethinking about the way that, what AI means to them now in the COVID world. A lot of people have started working remotely. A lot of offices have shut down. A lot of people have actually taken to re-understanding what AI can do for them. So in many ways, AI has sort of reset the standards, reset the level actually across the board was what my thinking is just from observations and from analysis. But I'll let Professor Virginia give her views and I can extend on that as well.
Yeah. Yes, I fully agree with Sunita, and there is different approaches in different areas of the world, but it's also quite obvious and quite acceptable and understandable why. We all deal with the technology, and the background cultures and the development is different in different parts of the world. So it's difficult to try to impose a one-size-fits-all solution or option all over the world. What I do think it's important is that And I think that that's perceived globally, the importance of responsible, addressing AI in a responsible way. It's addressed and accepted and conveyed globally. How we do it is different, but I think that we should give the space as well for different approaches to how to address responsibility in AI across different parts of the world. In some parts of the world, top-down regulation and legislation might work well, but in other parts of the world, a more soft regulation or bottom-up from the companies, the developers, the users, or the public in general might be a more suitable and more acceptable way to address it. So we do need to give space for different types of approaches. But I think that the discussion is global in terms of understanding and assuming that a responsible addressing AI in a responsible way is the only way to address AI. And that I think that everybody agrees, and Sunita also said that there is no business model for irresponsible or unethical AI.
There's
and
no
that I think is something around the world, everybody will agree with that. Of course, there are people who will try it and there will be kind of balance, but globally, I think we all can understand that.
I think on that point as well, right? I think that what Singapore has done, for instance, right? So MAS, PDPCs, their frameworks, their Veritas, everything coming together, none of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like a mandate. So there are suggestions, there are frameworks to encourage people to go down that path and to actually have a support framework that they can use in the organizations to actually guide them through the responsible AI journey. And I think that is key. And that's why I said it's kind of level set a lot of people, because awareness is key in responsible AI, right? If you're aware of what is being done, you're automatically questioning all the right questions. And I think then you seek to get the answers. Sounded very philosophical, but that's key, right? And that is the basis of responsible AI. And again, I don't want to differentiate it from AI, which is why I say every time you implement AI, the concept of has it been done in a responsible manner, that question itself shows that you're thinking about it. So that is key.
I do very much like the idea that AI should be synonymous with responsible AI. We don't have to actually have two things as separate. We have a lot more questions, which goes to show there's a lot of interest among our audience member, and we are about to be at time. So I have actually looked at all the questions and want to just ask you both this also as your closing remarks for the audience. What would be your one or two recommendations that members of the audience, individuals, big or small companies, startups, government organizations out there, any group you would like to focus on, what would be the one or two recommendations that you have so that they could start thinking more about AI in a responsible way or start to implement AI in a responsible way? For your thoughts, please, perhaps Virginia, for your closing words on this.
Yeah, I think the first thing to do, or the way to start, is really to take the question seriously. Why are we using AI? What is the problem or the issue that we are solving? Why should we be using AI? Why should we not be using AI? What are the potential implications or impact of what we are doing? Are we taking this impact sufficiently into consideration in the development of or the implementations that we are doing? And do we have enough broadness in our approach to the issue in terms of different types of disciplines or different types of people to be involved? So it's, again, responsible AI is not just something for the technology AI. It's really a broader issue, and answering these questions requires that we take a step outside of the technology solution, maybe a step outside of the comfort zone of many of us which develop and implement this type of systems, but really consider impact, consider those who are impacted, and consider what are the values, what are the principles that you really want to express and convey with the systems that you are developing or implementing.
Sunita, for your closing thoughts on this as well.
Sure. So I think it's important to stay true to your business, right? So what is your business model? What are the business questions that you're trying to address, right? And really understand if there is a valid use case for AI, number one. Number two, once you've identified those use cases and you've sort of understood in terms of the design of how you're going to implement AI for those for resolving those issues, you then get the relevant people from your various teams, the legal team, the business team, the tech team, the data team, together, like one or two bodies from each of those teams together into that council to actually understand, have all the boxes from the individual teams, well, list of to-dos, list of things to maintain, have they been ticked? Are those AI systems, compliant with internal compliance frameworks? Are they following the governance frameworks? Are they data compliant? Are they governed? Are they actually, fulfilling all the transparency for your consumers? And the businesses need to tell you that as well, right? So the businesses or the consumers within the organization, if they form a part of that council, if they're within the organization, then you can actually get them to understand, are they able to understand what it's being used for? So I think if you hit those 6 pillars that I mentioned earlier, you really develop that RACI and accountability of, who's going to take accountability and responsibility for anything that happens, that it's just not an AI system that ultimately going to be shut down if something goes wrong. So, you need to be ensuring of all of those things, and that forms the basis of responsible AI. And continuously be aware of things you're using, be aware of what you're implementing, and getting that awareness out to your consumers is very important.
Right. So in addition to what Virginia shared about setting the purpose with the right impact considerations in mind, as well as what Sunita has just said about staying true to your business, coming up with the right use cases, establish internal governance and compliance committees to help ensure that it works within the organization. I also just want to share my thought that I thought that building trust, whether it is internally or with your clients or your stakeholder, will also be important in ensuring that the AI solutions can actually be put to wide use in society. And in this COVID-19 situation, actually the case of South Korea managing communication with their population was actually a gold standard that I always like to refer to, how the South Korean foreign minister actually explained that being open with people and securing their trust is vitally important as they flatlined the curve. So that actually lends a very good reference point to businesses and governments everywhere as to how they can put AI systems to good use, designing it for the benefit of society at large. And with that, I would like to bring our event to a good close. And thank you very much for everyone who has stayed on with us for the past 1.5 hours, actually. And thank you very much, Virginia and Sunita, for your kind thoughts on today's event. We will be getting in touch with you to see whether there could be some collaboration that you may want to be open about, to talk to some of the members of audience who would like to have your contact details. And on our part at SGInnovate and Singapore, we will continue to explore this general awareness and conversation on how technology should be used responsibly, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic is over. With that, thank you very much to you both and to our audience, and have a good evening and a good day to you, Virginia, in Sweden.
Thank you, Son.
Thank you,
everyone.
bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.